a lot of people, particularly Kell Brook fans, are saying that his promoter Eddie Hearn effectively ruined his career by putting him in the ring with Gennady Golovkin. They're blaming his loss to Errol Spence Jr. on the weekend on the physical and psychological damage he sustained in the Triple G fight. You've even had people in the past, before the Triple G fight took place, but shortly after it was signed, like Adrian Broner, who came out on social media and said, I'm going to paraphrase here, but he basically said, your promoter, your people don't have your best interests at heart if they're putting you in the ring with Triple G. Now, I'm not sure if I agree with this, because the first person who suggested that Kell Brook fight Triple G was Kell Brook himself. It was shortly after the Amir Khan-Canelo Alvarez fight was announced that Kell Brook told his promoter Eddie Hearn, get me the Triple G Gennady Golovkin fight. He was the one that suggested it. And then, fast forward some months, the negotiations between Chris Eubank Jr. and Triple G fell apart. And Eddie Hearn suggested to Kell Brook that he step in and face Triple G instead. He gave him the option. He didn't force him to do it. He just gave him the option. Around that same type of time, Brook was actually negotiating a welterweight unification with the then WBO champion, Vargas. So he had options. He could have fought Vargas for a lot less money than Triple G, yes. But it was a much more winnable fight. And it's a fight which could have led to bigger paydays in the future had he beat Vargas and become unified welterweight champion. But Kell Brook himself decided to go for the option with more money involved. A bigger payday for himself. That's what he chose to do. Can you blame Eddie Hearn for that? Vargas is just not going to be as big a draw as a Triple G. How is that Eddie Hearn's fault? I'm not trying to paint Eddie Hearn out to be a saint at all. I'm not trying to say that he's without fault. Nothing like that. But in this particular situation, I can't say that Eddie Hearn ruined Kell Brook's career. He was the one given the options and he made his choices. Surely he knew what he was getting himself into when he took the Triple G fight. And after the Triple G fight, Eddie Hearn was trying to get Kell Brook to avoid Errol Spence. So if you don't have Errol Spence's best interests at heart, if you don't have Kell Brook's best interests at heart, why was he trying to get him to avoid Errol Spence? He wanted him to fight Khan. He wanted him to fight Pacquiao and all these other guys. But he was desperate for his man to avoid Errol Spence. He's been on the record publicly and said that in many, many interviews. Even Kell Brook has confirmed it. And it wasn't just a case of the weight. It wasn't just a case of having Kell Brook move up to 154. No. Because as I already said, Eddie Hearn was happy for Brook to take fights at 147 like Khan and Pacquiao. So he was trying to protect Kell Brook in that situation and look out for his best interest and his own best interest too. Because he knew how dangerous Errol Spence was and he felt like the risk of putting Brook in with Spence wasn't worth the reward because Spence wasn't as big a name as a Khan or a Pacquiao. But ultimately, Eddie Hearn's wishes were overruled by the fighter himself, Kell Brook. He's the one that made the choice to fight Errol Spence and not do what Eddie Hearn wanted him to do. And it was the same in the first instance when he was offered the Triple G fight. Maybe Eddie Hearn did want him to fight Triple G at that moment. He certainly gave him the opportunity. But Kell Brook didn't have to say yes. He could have gone in a different direction. So this whole idea that Eddie Hearn ruined his career, Eddie Hearn's just giving the fighters options, or giving this particular fighter anyway. I can't say all fighters. I can't speak for all Eddie Hearn situations, not at all. maybe there is situations where he forces certain fighters into certain fights, but I don't believe he forced Kell Brook into the Triple G fight. He certainly didn't force him into the Spence fight. He wanted him to avoid that fight. So those are just my thoughts on that, people. I know it's fashionable these days to hate Eddie Hearn, and he gets booed at his own shows and all this kind of stuff. Fair enough, but I just like to take things on a case-by-case basis and try and be as fair and objective as possible. If anyone is to blame for the demise of Kell Brook, surely it's Kell Brook himself, isn't it? And what happened in the Errol Spence fight, a lot of the Brook fans are conveniently blaming it on the residual damage, psychological and physical, that Brook sustained in the Triple G fight. Physically, I don't think there was much residual from the Triple G fight, but psychologically, I think there was some. Whether it was decisive in Kell Brook losing, I seriously question. I always felt that Errol Spence, stylistically, was all wrong for Kell Brook. His relentless pressure, his body attack, his size and strength, his youth, I felt he was all wrong for Kell Brook. And when you factor in the possibility that there would be residual physical and psychological scars from the Triple G fight, that's why I picked Errol Spence to beat Kell Brook, and why I was unwavering in my prediction. Not that I didn't think Errol Spence could beat Kell Brook without Brook being damaged goods, but the fact that he potentially would be damaged goods made me even more confident in sticking with my prediction of an Errol Spence victory. I'm going to do a separate video on Errol Spence and him not getting the credit that he deserves, where I'll expand a little bit more on that. But for now, I hate to be the defender of... Actually, I don't hate to be the defender of somebody that everybody seems to hate in Eddie Hearn, because I'm not really defending Eddie Hearn. I'm defending objectivity. Let's be objective here. Kell Brook has some control over his own destiny and has some control over his own career, but ultimately he wanted the big money. And that's why he took that Triple G fight. He didn't want to fight Vargas for substantially less. He wanted the big money now. And maybe you can't blame him for that. Drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel about everything I talked about in this video. It's